purpose of tonight's discussion with Bobby Tudor is to let you know a bit more about Houston at a pivotal hinge point. I think we would all agree that the energy transition has to happen. I think Bobby would agree. It's going to happen. And for a place like Houston, is it going to change as well with that, or is it going to try to persist the way things have been? It's probably a combination of all of the above, but nobody could be more well-versed in the topic and able to speak to it than Bobby Tudor. So with that, Bobby, I think people have access to your bio to some degree, but give us a bit about how you got to this point, starting at the university down the street, what you did in New York, London, then coming back here. Just give us a brief bio so we can get the conversation started.
Well, thank you, Duke, and thanks to all of you for being here and for having me. It's a great pleasure. I grew up in Louisiana and came to Rice on a basketball scholarship in 1978, and loved Houston. Moved away after graduation, lived in Europe, came back to graduate school at Tulane thinking I'd be a Louisiana lawyer, and about halfway through that decided that's no way to live your life.
Okay, so you said you said Tulane, and I have to stop you right there. There was a football game last week. Anybody see that game? So you have two Tulane alumni up here. And Tulane crushed USC, right? By 1 point at 8 seconds ago? Yeah. I was worried they were going to get hurt. We're Pac-12 people now with Arizona State, but Tulane really came through last week. How about that?
My family and I laugh about this. I went to Rice and Tulane. My wife went to Virginia and Columbia. We have kids who went to Northwestern and USC. So collectively, we might have 6 of the historically worst football teams in America represented in our family until this past weekend. So go roll Green Wave. That was awesome.
And the Green Wave the year before I think was like 2-11, and this year they were just the opposite.
The Rice Owls were in a bowl game. Interestingly, the only team in America with a losing record in a bowl game, and the reason we got in was we had the highest academic rating of any school with a losing record in America. So therefore, we were in a bowl game. It was fabulous.
So we'll forget this. We're just going to talk sports, all right? Keep going with that bio.
So I was working. We had moved from New Orleans to New York. I went to work for Goldman Sachs, and my wife Phoebe started graduate school in architecture, planning, and preservation at Columbia. And we had 4 great years in New York, and then Goldman Sachs was looking for someone to move to Houston and start an investment banking business, and I raised my hand and said I would love to do that. So we moved here in 1991 and had a terrific decade in Houston. Then we moved to London for 5 years and lived in London, and then after '05 moved back to Houston. I started a new business, and we sort of re-entered Houston in 2000, at the end of 2005. So Houston is really home to us. We both have roots in Louisiana. We probably we spent more hours on I-10 than we'd care to remember, but that's kind of our story.
And even when you were at Goldman, you moved into the energy sector.
Yeah.
So you became an expert in that area, both nationally and internationally.
Yeah, my investment banking career was very centered on the energy space.
Right. So the reason I really wanted to have you here tonight, for the benefit of our audience, many of whom are not Houstonians, they've just come here, but they'll understand what you did in that you gave a talk to the business community here, the Greater Houston Partnership, which would be the equivalent of whatever you all have in your respective cities that pulls all the business leaders together. And I think you gave this talk about 18 months ago. And I've heard people say you made it okay to talk about the necessary energy transition. I think you said energy and oil have been great to Houston, helped to build some of the institutions that are right outside this hotel. And in some ways, I think we're hypocrites when we talk about the fact that we've got to make some drastic changes with oil companies. Maybe that's going to come in some way, shape, or form. But yes, it is going to be different. I think your talk said the future won't look like the past, and we should get ready for certain things. Climate change is real. We've got to reduce our carbon footprints, et cetera. But it was, I think, a really important talk given that your stature in the industry, what you've done, caused business leaders to listen in a different way. Tell us about that talk. And by the way, I think you were the chair of the partnership at that time.
Well, I call it my Nixon to China moment. And the perk of being the chair of the Greater Houston Partnership, think of the Greater Houston Partnership as sort of the business roundtable or the Chamber of Commerce on steroids. Obviously Houston has a very, very large business community, 25 Fortune 500 companies here, second only to New York in America.
Most of them are
19 of the 25 are energy companies, 19 of 25. This group, Houston has a long history, and I think it's one of the great things about Houston, a long history of the business community being highly engaged in civic issues and working to make our city a better place. It kind of goes back to the history of Jay Jones, and I don't know if many of you know about that in Houston, but there's a long history of that. And I think relative to most major metros in America, the business community here is pretty broadly respected. Mm-hmm. Houston is ultimately a commercial proposition. Really, it was a stinky mosquito-infested bayou that has turned into one of the major metropolitan areas in the world because of this kind of commercial instinct. So in any case, the partnership is a voice of business in our region. And if you're the chairman of the partnership, you get to pick your topic of emphasis for your chairmanship. And the chairman before me was Scott McClellan, who ran HEB here. Scott focused on public education, which tells you something, right? That the business community in Houston would hone in on public education as a really significant issue for Houston. My successor at the partnership, Amy Cronus, who runs Deloitte's office here, focused on technology and disruptive technologies and how it's changing business in Houston and changing our society. I decided to focus on the energy transition. And I felt a couple of things in that decision. One was that it was clearly a really, really important issue to us in Houston. As I said, we have 25 Fortune 500 companies, 19 are energy companies. 40% of our total jobs are either directly in the energy business or induced in the energy business. The example I use is that if you're running the Subway sandwich shop in the lobby at ConocoPhillips, you think you're in the sandwich business, and really you're in the oil business. So 40% concentrated in one industry is just a lot, right, by any measure. And so really, even Los Angeles, which is the center for media and entertainment, wouldn't have that kind of concentration in one industry, or even New York City and finance. So we're highly concentrated in the energy world. And it's been fantastic to Houston. And in fact, if you look at sort of the past decade, from 2008, from the financial crisis till 2018, Houston, Texas is the fastest growing major metro in America by a long shot. And it's kind of crazy, actually, if you see the numbers. So, I want to say in the 3 years following the financial crisis, so 08 to 11, out of every net new job created in America, 25% were in greater Houston, Texas, right? So why? Well, the shale boom, right? U.S. onshore oil and gas production went from 5 million barrels to 13 million barrels in a relatively short period of time. And the great beneficiary of that was our region, right? We're just very, very kind of leveraged to the energy world. And so Houston was very much a boom town for that period of time. And my thesis, if you will, is that the conventional energy business is not going away anytime soon. In fact, I would argue that the world has had a big dose of reality here in the last 6 months about the importance of the traditional energy business to our overall well-being. But it clearly was not going to be the same engine for growth that it has been historically. And the question is not whether global oil demand is going to peak, it's simply when it's going to peak, and then what the shape of the decline curve looks like going forward. So Given that the Houston business community and Houston broadly tends to think in commercial terms, I really kind of framed the argument very much in commercial terms. One of the things I often say is that we're very good in Houston at when we see a dollar bill lying on the ground, we bend over and pick it up, right? And right now there is fantastic opportunity in the energy transition space. And so the way I framed it was that we have both a responsibility and an opportunity to be the leaders in a global energy transition. And a responsibility not because we've been selling cigarettes to children, right? That is not how I see it, certainly. That's not how the industry sees it. In fact, there's tremendous social utility in what this industry has delivered over a long period of time. But the fact that we have very, very real climate change issues that need to be addressed, and the fact that those solutions are not going to happen in the absence of the incumbent industry being right in the middle of that, means that we have a responsibility. The talent sits here, the expertise sits here, we know how to do big projects. There are more PhD chemists here per capita than any other major metro in America by a very long shot. There are more engineers. We have an incredibly sophisticated workforce. So for a lot of reasons, it's just very clear that unless Houston leans in, we're not going to find the solutions we need to transitioning our energy systems to ones of much, much lower CO2 emissions over time.
And sometimes you said it a little more directly. Houston could blow it. Let's not blow it. Let's see this as an opportunity.
Yeah,
to
that's
turn
right.
in a different direction based on the reading of the tea leaves that you just described. It's going to happen. We need to do it. We could be leading that transition, or we could be left behind if we don't.
I actually don't think it's going to happen without us.
Okay.
And so this notion that it's just that this transition is just inevitable, well, it's inevitable if only if our technology continues to advance and improve, and only if new assets get deployed, and only if capital supports it, and only if the people who know and understand energy systems are leaning in to make it happen.
Which is why your voice was authoritative, I think, to the partnership. And I want to go back to your description of picking up the dollar off the street. Clearly you, either when you were at Goldman Sachs or here with your firm, saw things happening with the shale revolution and how the business was going to change, and the potential for what's sometimes been described as energy independence for the country. There was going to be a new way of producing, and you brought a lot of capital to that, and contributed significantly to what we maybe see in the Permian Basin and or elsewhere. When you saw those dollars on the ground, so to speak, why was that obvious to you, or more obvious to you than maybe to others?
It's obvious to others too.
I know.
and there are people in the room tonight who are working that.
You were a leader.
Who are working that really hard. But I think, look, I think the incumbent industry can be fairly criticized for being a little slow to the game, right? And for being skeptical around the fundamental underlying economics of a lot of the new technologies. And that skepticism has been meaningfully eroded. And if you talk to our incumbent industry today, whether it's the oil and gas companies or the power companies or the petrochemical companies or the services companies or the infrastructure companies, every one of them now actually believes they see a path to making money in the energy transition and to being a meaningful contributor to making it happen. Now, every company is coming at this from a slightly different place, right? It depends what your balance sheet looks like. It depends what your shareholders want. It depends what your core competency is. And so there are plenty of Houston region companies who are mid-sized oil and gas producers who look at all this and say, I can't really do that stuff. What I know how to do is this, and so that's what I'm going to continue to do. And my view on that is fantastic. We need it, right? And the world needs it. And so keep doing it and do it well. Just do it cleaner, right? And so every company I know who is not pivoting their business model is very focused on their own emissions footprint and focused on doing that. But they also believe, and I think quite rightly, that our global economy will continue to need what they do for some substantial period of time. There are other companies who are changing their business model and are pivoting and allocating capital to things that are outside what their historical core competency is. And then there's a whole new set, excuse me, of new company formation and of private capital backing new company formation to drive new activity of all sorts. So we need all of it, really, and that's what it's going to take.
So it's not often, and I do want to talk about your leadership role with the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, which is occupying a lot of your time and is what you were all but announcing to the partnership when you were talking about this transition. But before we get there, it's not often that someone gets the chance to really substantially help to build up a sector the way you were able to do, the capital you brought here and the things that have happened. And, there are definitely pros to what you're describing. We need energy. It's not going away, and you couldn't be more right about that, and your international experience brings that home. Given what's happening in the world, we do need energy in places, and in some cases desperately. But there's also no doubt about some of the negatives that have grown out of the industry, and we could talk about methane, we could talk about a variety of things. Not many people get a chance to help participate in something and then go to the other side of the equation and say, but I see it's going to change and I'm going to come at it from this direction. That's an amazing, life experience, but holding really different thoughts in your head at the same time. Tell us more about how you do that.
Well, I view the challenge as a dual challenge, not as a singular challenge. If you view the challenge as a singular challenge of, we have an existential threat of climate change, we have to dramatically drive down CO2 emissions, and we have to do it quickly, I think that leads to one mindset. If you have, however, a perspective that says, well, we have to do that, but at the same time, we have to provide reliable, affordable, and secure energy to the world today, then that leads you to think about it differently. And I definitely come at it from the latter position and not the former position. So I don't see it as sort of fundamentally competing propositions, if you will. We need cleaner energy systems. We need much lower CO2 emissions. And we need reliable and affordable and secure energy. The consequences of doing one without the other are in both cases terrible. They're terrible, right? And so the challenge is just immense. It makes for a really, really fun, interesting professional life, but because you feel like you're working on something that is really important. I've spent my whole career in investment banking, and my mother still doesn't understand what I do. Being in the middle of this, is really fascinating, right? It's this intersection of geopolitics, law, economics, science, academia. And all of that sort of comes together. And look, it's not unusual, but the vast majority of Americans have no fundamental understanding of where energy comes from, or why the lights come on when they flip the switch, or why when you pull on the pump, the gasoline comes out, and how that all happens and how it gets there. We do here in Houston, and if we have, a bit of a chip on our shoulder around a feeling that work has been demonized, I think it's, while perhaps a little overly defensive, it's also with some justification relative to the social utility that comes from the energy business. So anyway, it's great fun and it's interesting. And when you live in Houston, Texas, you're right in the middle of it every day, and that's awesome.
So speaking of not understanding investment banking, I'll raise my hand there, but your mother doesn't understand it. I'm wondering if others in Texas understand it. I can't imagine a better person to ask than you about, speaking of demonization, the demonization of ESG investing. And the idea that your former employer should be requested to leave the state, or I think they have at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, based on certain laws, that, Bills 13 and 19 and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think Goldman Sachs has, but several have, right?
Yeah. But it's around, I think, the politicization
Right.
of investment banking, and what does it mean for your industry, the incumbent industry? What do you make of that?
Yeah, the whole corporate world has changed, right? This notion of I just work for my shareholders, and my job is to provide a maximum economic return to my shareholders, and that's all I'm here to do. That game has changed, right? And if you, with that approach, increasingly you will lose your social license to operate. And I think leaders of big corporations all over the country see it that way and understand that, and so increasingly are feeling the need to take stands. Now that is perilous territory, right? As Disney figured out in Florida, or BlackRock in Texas.
Yeah.
And partly because those decisions are viewed as fundamental political decisions, and there are differing views around all that. What's interesting, for example, at BlackRock, the stance at BlackRock today, given what's happened in Europe with gas prices, is very different from what it was before that. Larry Fink is now saying, well, I now actually understand that this fossil fuels, we really actually do need this stuff, and people of us in the industry are like, okay, Larry, get off of your private plane, right, where you just burned I don't know how much, jet diesel to get here, and understand how the world works. And so, but employees of companies and communities of companies are really demanding that companies take positions and take stances. So being a corporate CEO is particularly in a public company is harder than it used to be, and certainly being a public company CEO in the energy world is harder than it used to be.
But it's just fascinating that it seems that Texans potentially losing out on hundreds of millions of dollars of returns that could be going to them, and pension funds and other things, because of this political stance, and the oil companies and others and investment bankers get caught in the middle of that. It's just
well, I wouldn't say the bankers do, but big investing institutions get caught in it. And my view is that will actually, with regard to energy, I think that is going to moderate. Because I think the whole conversation around energy, the pendulum has swung to a much better place than it was 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago. And there's nothing like an energy shortage and sky-high prices to remind people of why having secure, reliable, and affordable energy is important. But there's also nothing like dramatic weather events, to remind people that, man, this stuff didn't used to happen. And we've got a real problem, and we've got to address it.
So speaking of dramatic weather events, which in some ways inspired Ten Across, if you watched Katrina happen in 2005, which was entirely predictable, not that year, but hurricanes come to Houston, they come to Baton Rouge, they come to New Orleans, they come to Mobile, all of whom are represented here tonight. We can see certain things in the future, and we can choose to prepare for them or not. And hopefully what we saw in New Orleans, Katrina caused us to do different things there, and we have. How often, does the Houston Chip Channel keep you up at night? And its vulnerability?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Tell people about that.
So the Houston Chip Channel is the largest contiguous industrial complex in North America by a very long shot. And if I would encourage you to just go to YouTube and find a drone tour of the Houston Ship Channel. If you've never done that, it's mind-blowing what is there. And it's sort of the backbone of industry on the Gulf Coast, and certainly the backbone of industry in Houston. It is full of petrochemical facilities, of refineries, of storage, of power generation, of hydrogen production. How about this? You know, people talk about the new hydrogen economy and the importance of the new hydrogen economy. 40% of all hydrogen produced in America is produced in Greater Houston, Texas. 40%. 60% of every hydrogen dedicated pipeline in America is in Houston, Texas, right? And so it's just an incredible concentration of stuff. But you know what? There's some nasty stuff in there, right? And a 20-foot storm surge that knocks storage tanks off and disrupts petrochemical facilities and particularly spills a lot of that nasty stuff into the water and into the surrounding communities is a frightening prospect.
Which is the local circumstance, which is awful.
Right.
But it would affect the nation, if not have global reverberations right away, right?
Well, if you guys will remember, about a year ago, and a lot of Americans kind of missed this, but it was very, very kind of telling and important. The Colonial Pipeline is the largest refined products pipeline in America, and it runs gasoline, primarily gasoline, from the Houston Gulf Coast to New York. Colonial Pipeline got hacked via malware and effectively shut down, and there was panic in New York. Because if that stuff doesn't get delivered in New York City, the East Coast stops in its tracks, right? And that was one hack into one pipeline, right? If you totally disrupt refining capacity on the Gulf Coast of the U.S., literally much of the U.S. comes to a halt, just stops, right? So there are the horrible environmental consequences associated with it. There are the economic consequences associated with it. It's a big, scary issue for us here, and our team at the Kinder Institute, I see Bill here and others, spend a lot of time on this. We now have the money appropriated for this big coastal spine project, which we think is a good first line of defense in any case. But with our industrial might and concentration of assets here come a lot of issues. A lot of issues, and there are issues that we have to deal with.
So let's turn the corner on this and get to what you're doing now in the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, which is addressing these kinds of things.
Right.
Talk about that, how you're structuring that, and how you think Houston will change if that and other things that are going on here get traction.
Well, we call it HETI, H-E-T-I, the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, and the point of this initiative is we want to look up 20 years from now and find Houston still, if not more than ever, the energy capital of the world. We believe that energy systems globally in 20 years will look quite different from the way that they look today. And that means that Houston will look quite different from the way it looks today. Our company makeup will look different. Our infrastructure will look different. Our economy will look different. And interestingly, if you go around to the incumbent energy players, there is very broad consensus around that. I get almost no pushback in my conversations with energy companies about that fundamental issue. And so the question for us in Houston is, are we doing the things we need to do today to make sure that 20 years from now, we will wake up and we'll still be the energy capital of the world? So that means that if the DOE is going to put out $10 billion to build hydrogen hubs, we need to make sure that Houston, Texas is one of them. If a young entrepreneur with a whiz-bang new electrolyzer is thinking about where to build his company or her company, we want it to be in Houston, Texas. if green hydrogen is to be an economic product for powering petrochemical facilities and power plants and other things, that means we need to get renewable power from the places where it's produced, primarily right now in West Texas and South Texas. We need to get it here to our industrial complex. So there are just a million things we need to do to have all the building blocks in place to be a winner. The good news is we're starting from a great spot, right? Texas is the largest wind power generator in America. We're currently second in solar. We think by the end of 23 we'll be the largest solar power generator in America. I think one of the real defining characteristics in Texas and the reason we're the largest wind power generator in America today is we are really good at siting and permitting and executing on large projects in a way that much of the rest of America just is not. And so we know how to do that stuff. We can get it done. We can get it done quickly while other people are wrestling with it. I took a trip to Boston and met with, this is related to Greentown Labs, which is a kind of climate tech accelerator that's in Boston and now in Houston. And I met with a bunch of their companies there, and I was talking to a guy who, a MIT postdoc working on a new electrolyzer for hydrogen, and I said, well, and his company was in Boston, and I said, well, how are you going to move the hydrogen around? He said, what do you mean move the hydrogen around? I said, well, if you produce it with your electrolyzer, you ultimately have to get it to where it's going to be consumed. He said, well, yeah, that's right, and I'll figure that out later. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Do you think there will ever be a hydrogen pipeline built between Boston and New York City? And he looked at me with these big eyes like, uh-oh, and the answer to that is probably not, right? But you know where they can get built? It's on the Gulf Coast of the United States, right? Because we know how to do that stuff, and we can permit it, and we can site it. Now, can we do all that? Can we make this big transition with all the infrastructure investment required in a more environmentally responsible way by engaging our local communities and thinking hard about all of the issues that, in the last big building boom of the post-war era, frankly, we didn't think about all that much? Well, we better, right? Or it won't get done, and it certainly won't get done effectively and in a time frame that the world needs it.
And for those of you in the audience, tomorrow we will elaborate on some of these things. I see Barbara Berger in the back. We'll talk about new companies that are coming up. Marilyn is going to be moderating the first panel, which will talk about big projects and how we can or can't do that in certain parts of the country, what we used to do, what we don't do now. So you and I have a mutual friend, Mark Tersick, who was at Goldman when you were there, someone I knew back in the day, high school actually. And he wanted to offer a question because we were chatting. Apparently the two of you were talking. And he said, ask Bobby, if you were president instead of Biden, which, that'd be really interesting. Think about that for a minute. What would you be doing to address climate change? If you had those levers at that level, what do you think we really ought to prioritize?
I would push a legislative solution for siting and permitting renewable power projects. Because our issue right now is not that the projects are uneconomic. It's not that there's not capital to fund them. It's that you cannot get them sited and permitted. And part of that is a state issue. So 80% of all siting and permitting gets done at the states. Part of it is a federal issue. And so it's interesting. We just had all this money passed in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act designed to kind of get these big projects going, but there wasn't a piece of new legislation around siting and permitting. And I would try to do that. There are some very good ideas out there around that issue. My friend Jim Connaughton, who is a climate advisor in the George W. Bush administration, believes that we ought to pattern the legislation on CFIUS legislation, which is currently in place. And CFIUS is national security regulation, where if you are doing a deal that involves China or Russia or sensitive technology, you have a very specific process for getting it approved, and it's a thumbs up or thumbs down process.
Yeah.
And basically, you have 60 days to make the filing, and then the government has 90 days to give you thumbs up or thumbs down, and then it's either done or not done. And if we had legislation like that would allow projects to get done, there would be an explosion of renewable power projects, there'd be an explosion of hydrogen projects, there'd be an explosion of CCUS projects. It would be a total game changer. And so that's what I would do if I was president.
You know what's so interesting, and I'm looking at Abena right here, who's the former Chief Resilience Officer of Tallahassee and now has a much more elaborate title. That was the same answer in our discussion this afternoon around housing and affordable housing. There's never going to be enough money, but you can change the permitting structure. You can make approvals more effective. You can look at what to do with abandoned lots and other things. There's a role for government to lower the bar to make certain things possible. I don't mean lower the bar in terms of ambition or environmental issues, but make it easier to get stuff done. So that kind of legislation, whether it's at the city level or at the national level, relates to a lot of issues that are in the Tenacross.
Can I have two things
Yeah.
that I would do if I was president?
Since you're president, you can do whatever you want now.
The second thing I would do would be to have an energy transition policy that's focused on levering extant infrastructure. Because my view is that completely replumbing the world's energy systems is simply too expensive and it will take too long. So right now, globally, we are spending about $1 trillion a year on all things energy transition related. The IEA says that to meet our Paris goals, we need to spend $4 trillion a year. And we need to spend $1 trillion a year on the incumbent energy business while we're waiting to make that transition, right? So the amount of capital required to make all this happen is really, really mind-blowing. But you can dramatically lessen that capital if you'll leverage your extant systems. And what does that mean? Well, that means that CCUS, so carbon capture and storage, should be absolutely central to your policy.
So you're optimistic about carbon capture?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic
You
about
think it can happen quickly enough, and
Yep.
we can actually?
Yep, I think the technology is there right now. Primarily, what we're missing is legislative sort of legal framework, so that the companies doing the projects know exactly kind of the rules of the road. But now, that being said, CCUS doesn't work everywhere. You need good geology. We happen to be lucky here in Texas, and Louisiana would be the same, in the same boat, that there is very good geology for sequestration in our region here. But there are big parts of the industrial world where you can't. So there's not a single place in Japan where you would feel safe sequestering CO2.
Interesting.
In the country, right? And big chunks of America, including big chunks of America that are very close to large industrial areas like the Great Lakes.
Yes.
So you can't do it everywhere, but man, it works great for us down here. And it's interesting, the current administration and the DOE have really come around on this issue. Like 2 years ago, you didn't hear CCUS from Secretary Granholm or the Biden administration at all. She made a trip down here, when was it, Barbara? Maybe 6 months ago or something like that, and gave a very full-throated sort of support to it. And in the IRA, there's a very large new subsidy of $85 a ton for CCUS. And so I think there's a growing realization in the political class that there is no path to carbon neutrality, at least in the intermediate term, that does not involve CCUS.
For comments tonight.
My
Thank you.
pleasure, too.
Yep, happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.